At 2 a.m. I was drifting into sleep when a desperate knock shook my door. I opened it, and there she was, my daughter. Her lips were bleeding, her eyes swollen, her body trembling. And through sobs, she whispered words that made my blood boil. "Dad, Robert hit me because of his mistress." In that instant, I knew my life as her father, and as a man sworn to protect, would never be the same. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I had just turned off the television after a long day of work. Being a cop in this town didn't always mean life or death emergencies, but that night I had broken up a fight at a downtown bar, written reports until past midnight, and returned home with a body that felt like lead. All I wanted was a few hours of rest. Outside, the street was alive despite the late hour, motorcycles roaring by, dogs barking, young men laughing at the corner. I closed my eyes, hoping the noise would fade into nothingness. Then came that pounding knock, sharp and desperate, like someone clinging to the last chance they had. My heart jumped into my throat. Instincts honed from years on, the force surged through me. Who would be knocking at this hour? I grabbed a chair, approached the door cautiously, and called out, "Who is it?" For a moment there was only silence, then weaker knocks, followed by a choked voice that nearly made me collapse myself. "Dad, open up, please." It was Sarah, my Sarah. I rushed to unlock the door, and the moment it opened, she fell into my arms. Her body shook violently, fragile as though every ounce of strength had been drained from her. I held her close, stunned at the sight of her face in the porch light. One eye swollen shut, her lips split and crusted with blood, her hands pressed tightly to her stomach, as though she was trying to hold in pain too deep to bear. "Sarah, what happened?" My voice cracked as the question left me, but I already knew. "Robert," she whispered. "He hit me, because of her. His mistress." Then her words broke into sobs that stabbed through my chest like knives. For a moment I could not breathe. Rage and heartbreak collided inside me, leaving me dizzy. My daughter, the little girl who once ran through my yard shouting, "Dad, watch me," was now broken, terrified, hurt by the man who had vowed to protect her. My fists clenched, my jaw tightened, and I felt an oath burn in my throat. No one harms my daughter and walks away free. I helped Sarah into the living room and eased her down onto the sofa, though she trembled so badly I feared she might break apart in my arms. Her eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion and pain, but her grip on my sleeve was tight, desperate, as if she feared I would leave her alone for even a second. I ran to the kitchen for a damp cloth and pressed it gently to her lip, though every wince from her cut felt like a knife twisting in my own chest. When I finally coaxed her hands away from her stomach, my blood turned to ice. A deep, purple-black bruise spread across her abdomen, so large and violent that I felt as though the blows had landed on me instead. My pulse hammered, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, how long has this been going on?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her swollen face, unable to answer. I pressed my hand against hers and whispered, "Don't worry, I've got you now. You're safe with me." But inside, I was anything but calm. Inside, my fury was a wildfire. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Dr. Marcos Herrera, the night shift doctor at the hospital. "Get ready, Marcos. I'm bringing my daughter. She's hurt, bad." My car was still in the shop for brake repairs, so I called for a taxi, pacing the room like a caged animal until headlights finally lit up the window. Supporting Sarah with one arm, I led her outside. Each step she took seemed to tear through her body, her knees buckling, her breath shallow. We slid into the back seat of the taxi, and she leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering broken apologies. "I didn't want to bother you, Dad, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Those words nearly shattered me. Bother me? I thought. I am her father. My duty, my love, my reason for living is to protect her. And yet here she was, apologizing as though she had wronged me by coming to me in the middle of her nightmare. I stroked her hair gently and murmured, "You never have to apologize to me, Sarah. Never. You hear me?" As the taxi sped through the near-empty streets, every streetlight flickering against the glass, I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. My daughter had been beaten, betrayed, and humiliated by the man who swore to honor her. My hands trembled with a fury I forced down, because right now she needed calm, not chaos, but inside. I made a vow so clear it echoed in my bones. Robert would pay, and I would make sure of it. The taxi screeched to a stop in front of the hospital. Neon letters glowed emergency room, their cold white light bathing us as if announcing how dire things were. I slid out first, then helped Sarah from the seat. She could barely stand, her weight collapsing into me, her hand clutched against her ribs. Her breaths came sharp and shallow, each one sounding like a struggle for survival. Dr. Marcos Herrera was already waiting at the entrance, alerted by my call. He took one look at Sarah and didn't waste a single word, just motioned for a nurse. Together we hurried her down the corridor into an examination room. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mixing with the sound of rubber soles squeaking on tile. I kept hold of Sarah's hand until the nurse guided me back. My chest ached watching her vanish behind those doors, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. Minutes crawled like hours. I paced the hallway, my police instincts torn between fatherly fear and the cold discipline I had learned through years of duty. Finally, Dr. Herrera emerged, his face grim. "She has severe contusions," he said in a low voice. "Her ribs are bruised, possibly fractured. She's dehydrated, exhausted, and traumatized." Each word landed like a hammer against my chest. I wanted to storm out, find Robert, and drag him by his throat into this very room so he could see what he had done, but I couldn't, not yet. Rage without proof was just madness. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to wait. I slipped into the room quietly. Sarah lay on the bed, hooked to an IV, her face pale under the harsh lights. For a moment, I thought she was asleep, but then I noticed her phone buzzing on the table. The screen lit up with messages, one after another, 7 missed calls, all from Robert. Then a text appeared, its words burning into me like acid. "Open your mouth and you lose everything." My hand shot forward, ready to grab the phone and see every filthy threat he had written, but Sarah stirred, weak as she was, and snatched it from the table with trembling hands. "Don't, Dad," she whispered, panic flashing in her swollen eyes. "Please, it's nothing." Nothing? My throat tightened with fury, but I forced myself to remain calm. She was terrified, her fear so deep she thought even looking at his messages would bring his wrath down upon her. I leaned close and pressed her hand gently. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Sarah. You're not alone. Not now, not ever." I said nothing more, but inside my resolve crystallized into steel. Robert had crossed a line, and there was no going back. By the time dawn began to break, Sarah had been stabilized enough for me to take her home. She leaned against me the whole way, fragile but clinging, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. When I helped her onto the sofa again, she curled into the blanket like a child, her body still trembling as though the nightmare hadn't ended. I sat nearby, watching her chest rise and fall, and the fire inside me burned hotter with every breath she took. I stepped outside to catch a moment of air, but even then, the weight on my chest didn't lift. The street was still quiet, the sun just beginning to stain the horizon. Across the road, my neighbor Ricardo was sweeping his front yard, his broom scratching against the pavement. When he spotted me, he frowned, set the broom aside, and walked over quickly. "Antonio, I heard something last night," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Knocking, crying. Did something happen?" I hesitated for a moment, then sighed heavily. "It was Sarah. Her husband, Robert. He beat her and threw her out in the middle of the night." The words tasted like poison on my tongue, but Ricardo's eyes flashed with anger. "That bastard!" he growled, clenching his fists. Then, almost as if a thought struck him, he added, "You know, my camera might have caught it. The one by my front gate. It records everything." Hope flared inside me. "Can you show me?" I asked quickly. He nodded, pulled out his phone, and within moments the small screen lit up with grainy footage. There it was, Sarah in the dead of night, pounding weakly at my door, her cries faint but unmistakable. Seeing it made my stomach twist in knots. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. This was more than just pain. It was proof. "Send it to me," I said, my voice firm, though my throat was tight. Ricardo did better. He let me record it directly with my own phone. When the clip finished, I lowered the device, my hands trembling. "This will help," Ricardo said, his tone steady. "If you need me to testify, I will. Don't let that man think he can get away with this." I looked at him, truly looked, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Ricardo. You don't know how much this means." He squeezed my shoulder, his eyes blazing with a quiet promise. "Make him pay." As I walked back inside, phone in hand, I glanced at my daughter asleep under the blanket. Her face was swollen, her body broken, but now I had something I hadn't had before. Evidence. It wouldn't erase her pain, but it was a weapon, and I intended to use it. When I closed the door behind me, I stood for a long moment in the silence of the living room, watching Sarah sleep. The blanket rose and fell with each fragile breath. Her lip was cracked, her eye swollen, her hands curled tightly as if she still expected another blow. My throat ached. I wanted to scoop her up like when she was a child and promise her that nothing would ever hurt her again. But I knew words alone wouldn't protect her now. Action would. Proof would. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom and opened the old wooden wardrobe. Hanging inside was my police uniform, blue shirt, khaki pants, polished belt, and the holster for my service weapon. I had worn it for years, day after day, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it wasn't just a uniform. It was armor. It was a vow. I touched the fabric, rough under my fingertips, and felt a tremor of rage steady into cold determination. Slowly, deliberately, I put it on. Each button I fastened was like a promise. Each strap I tightened was an oath. By the time I clipped the badge onto my chest, I no longer felt like a weary man. Was a father, yes, but I was also a cop sworn to protect the innocent, and this time, the innocent was my own flesh and blood. I grabbed the phone and dialed Victor Salazar, the family lawyer who had once defended a fellow officer I trusted. His voice came groggy through the line. "Hello?" "Victor," I said, my tone leaving no space for doubt. "Start the plan now." There was a pause on the other end. "Antonio, are you sure?" he asked carefully. "Completely," I replied, my voice low but unshakable. "This man thinks he can destroy my daughter and rob my family. I won't let him. Prepare everything." I hung up before he could say more. My jaw was tight, my fists curled. This wasn't going to be a fight of fists or bullets. It would be a fight of evidence, of patience, of striking when the moment was right. I retrieved my old digital camera from the drawer, checked its battery, and returned to the living room. Carefully, I lifted the blanket from Sarah. She stirred faintly but didn't wake. My chest clenched as I raised the camera and began to take photographs. Click, her split lip. Click, the swollen eye. Click, the massive bruise across her stomach. Each flash illuminated her pain, each photo a silent accusation. By the time I lowered the camera, my hands were trembling, not with doubt but with fury sharpened into resolve. I wasn't just documenting injuries. I was building a case, brick by brick, bullet by bullet. And Robert had no idea what storm was coming for him. The next morning, while Sarah rested in her room, I received a call that made my stomach tighten. The voice on the other end was low and urgent. "Antonio, it's Romero Alcazar from the Public Property Office. I think you need to come down here. There's something strange with the land transfer under your family's name." I frowned. "Land transfer? I haven't signed anything. Neither has my daughter." Romero hesitated. "Exactly. That's why I'm calling you directly. Come quickly, and be discreet." Minutes later, I was walking into his office, my heart pounding like a drum. Romero shut the door behind me, his eyes darting nervously as he slid a file across his desk. "This property," he whispered, "the land your father left you. Last week it was officially transferred to a woman named Denise Salgado." The name hit me like a blow. Denise, the mistress. My jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grind. "That's impossible," I growled. Romero opened the folder and pointed at the signatures. "See for yourself. These are supposed to be yours and your daughter's." I leaned over the desk, and when I saw the scribbles on the papers, my blood ran cold. Shaky, clumsy imitations of our names, nothing like the way we signed, forged. My hands trembled as I held the document. Robert's face burned into my mind, his smug smile, his false charm, the way he had once shaken my hand and called me Dad. My voice cracked with fury. "Who brought these papers in?" "One of my clerks told me it was Robert himself," Romero admitted, lowering his voice even more. "He said you authorized him to file it because you were too busy." I closed the file, slowly, forcing myself not to slam it shut. My father's land, his sweat, his legacy, the soil my family had worked for generations, stolen with nothing but ink and lies. Robert hadn't only beaten my daughter. Now he had tried to rob us of our history, our dignity. Romero leaned closer. "Antonio, I shouldn't even be showing you this. If anyone here finds out, I could lose my job. But I respect your family, and I know fraud when I see it." I nodded tightly, swallowing the storm in my throat. "You've done the right thing. Please, make me a photocopy of this file, quietly." He slid the papers back into the drawer and whispered, "Be careful. If Robert forged documents this bold, it means he has help from someone inside the office. Don't trust everyone." As I walked out clutching the copies, my chest heaved with restrained fury. Robert had raised his hand against my daughter. Now he had tried to erase my father's legacy. This was no longer just about revenge. This was about justice. I couldn't sleep that night. The forged documents burned in my mind like fire. Each line of Robert's fake signature a personal insult carved into my blood. My daughter's bruises were still fresh, and now my father's land, our family's inheritance, had been dragged into Robert's schemes. Enough was enough. The next morning, I slipped into civilian clothes, a plain jacket and old jeans, but I carried the evidence file in my bag. Inside were the photographs of Sarah's injuries, the medical report, Ricardo's video, and the copy of the forged property transfer. Every piece was a weapon, and I intended to use them. Robert owned a pawn shop in town. That was his kingdom, the place where he strutted like a man untouchable, surrounded by money, and by the two thugs he called his men. My car rolled to a stop in front of the shop, dust swirling in the morning sun. I pushed open the door, and the smell of cigarette smoke and machine oil hit me like a wall. Two of his lackeys looked up from the shelves, their eyes narrowing when they saw me. One smirked. "Look who it is, the proud father-in-law." I ignored them and walked straight to the back office. The door was open, and there sat Robert, counting stacks of bills on his desk, his face calm, almost smug. When his eyes met mine, he leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Well, well, if it isn't the old man himself. What brings you here? Missing your son-in-law already?" I placed the file on his desk, each page a silent accusation. Robert flipped through them with a mocking smile, but for a brief second I saw his expression flicker, just enough to know he recognized the weight of what I had. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked casually. "Bruises, photos, paperwork? Please, I've got better lawyers than you." I leaned in close, my voice cold. "These aren't just papers, Robert. This is your downfall. Every mark on Sarah's body, every forged signature, every lie you've told, it's all here." His smirk twisted into anger. He slammed his hand on the desk and shot up to his feet. "You think you can threaten me? In this town nobody dares touch me. Not you, not your badge, not anyone." I held his gaze, my voice like steel. "You're wrong. I'm not here as a cop. I'm here as a father, and I will bury you with the truth." For a moment, silence hung heavy between us, only broken by the nervous shifting of his men outside the door. Robert sneered and spat the words like venom. "Your daughter deserved discipline." The fire inside me nearly consumed me then. I wanted to leap across the desk and make him eat those words, but I didn't. I gathered the file, straightened, and said coldly, "From now on, Robert, it's not you who disciplines anyone. It's the law that will discipline you." I turned and walked out, his furious shouts following me into the street. But inside, I felt no fear, only certainty. The war had truly begun. The days after that confrontation were heavy with tension. Word travels fast in this town, faster than the truth. By the time I walked through the market one morning to buy vegetables, whispers followed me like shadows. Two women at the fruit stall leaned toward each other, muttering just loud enough for me to hear. They say Sarah made it up, that she talked back too much, and Robert just put her in her place. Their words were like knives, slicing at the already raw wound in my chest. I gritted my teeth and kept walking, refusing to let them see my fury. At the cafe nearby, an old man sipped his coffee and shook his head as I passed. "Antonio's using his badge to go after his son-in-law," he murmured to no one in particular. My fists curled until my knuckles cracked. These were the same people who had smiled at Sarah when she was a child, who had broken bread with me over the years, and now, with a few of Robert's lies, they had turned against us. That afternoon, Victor Salazar, my lawyer, called me into his office. He spread a stack of papers across his desk, his expression grim. "Robert just hired Hector Valdivia," he said. The name alone made my stomach drop. Valdivia was a sharp lawyer from the city, known for twisting truth into knots. Victor tapped the counterclaim with his pen. "He's accusing Sarah of fabricating the abuse to extort money. He's saying you, as a police officer, are abusing your authority to slander him." I picked up the papers, reading the accusations, line by line. Each word painted Sarah and me as the villains, as schemers trying to ruin an innocent man. My jaw tightened. I looked at Victor. "How do we fight this?" He met my gaze steadily. "We fight with evidence. And Antonio, you already have plenty. But be prepared. They'll drag your name, your badge, and your daughter through the mud. Robert is desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." When I returned home, Sarah sat curled on the sofa, her eyes tired, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug of tea. She looked up at me with a weak smile, but it vanished when she saw the papers in my hands. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sat beside her, unable to soften the blow. "He's trying to make you the liar now. He's saying you made it all up." Her face went pale, her lips quivered. "So he'll ruin me, even after everything he's done?" Tears filled her eyes. I pulled her close, holding her tightly as she sobbed into my chest. My heart ached, but I whispered into her hair, "No, Sarah, he won't ruin you. He'll ruin himself. The truth will bury him." But deep inside, I knew the battle had become more brutal. Robert wasn't just fighting with fists anymore. He was fighting with lies, money, and influence, and the whole town was watching. The following nights were restless. I kept a chair by the window, staring out into the dark street, every shadow and every passing car setting my nerves on edge. Sarah tried to sleep, but she woke up trembling at every sound, her body still raw with fear. I told her again and again that she was safe with me, but even I knew Robert's reach was long. One evening, as I walked Sarah back from her therapy session, I noticed two men leaning against the wall of a narrow alley. Cigarettes glowed in their hands, smoke curling in the cold air. They weren't strangers. I had seen them before, always hovering around Robert's pawn shop. As we passed, one of them smirked, lifting his chin in mock respect. "Careful, officer," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "People around here believe Robert more than they believe you." Sarah gripped my arm tighter, her nails digging into my sleeve. I didn't respond, just guided her quickly into the house, but my blood boiled. Cowards lurking in alleys, feeding on fear. That night, when we returned, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No sender, no name, just a single sheet of paper inside. The words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Shut up, or you lose your daughter." I stood there staring at the note, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from rage. He dared to threaten my daughter in my own home. He dared to think I would bow to intimidation. Slowly, carefully, I slipped the letter into the evidence file. This wasn't just another threat. It was one more nail in his coffin. Later that night, I called Victor, my lawyer, and read him the note word for word. He listened silently, then said, "Good, keep it safe. The more desperate he gets, the more he exposes himself. But Antonio, be cautious. Robert isn't stupid. He's cornered, and cornered men lash out." I thanked him, though the fire in my chest made it hard to breathe. After I hung up, I walked to Sarah's room. She was asleep, but her face was twisted in a nightmare, her lips whispering words I couldn't catch. I sat beside her bed, brushing the hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You're safe. I won't let him touch you again, not while I'm breathing." But even as I said it, my jaw clenched, because I knew Robert wouldn't stop. Not with rumors, not with lies, not even with threats. He wanted to break us, and if I didn't act soon, he just might. That night, staring at the shadows flickering on the wall, I promised myself that the next move would be mine. I knew the threats would keep coming. Robert's power wasn't just his fists or his money, it was fear. If he could make Sarah hide and make the town believe his lies, he thought he'd already won. But I wasn't about to sit back and let him strangle us with silence. The missing piece was Denise, the mistress. She wasn't just part of Sarah's pain, she was part of Robert's schemes. If I could get her to speak, everything could change. I heard she frequented a small bar on the far end of Hidalgo Street, a smoky place, loud with ranchera music and the sour scent of spilled tequila. That night, I put on an old jacket and a cap, nothing that would make me look like a cop. I needed to blend in. When I walked through the door, the atmosphere was thick with laughter and shouting. I slipped into a dark corner, ordered nothing, and waited. Around 10 o'clock she appeared, Denise. Her red dress clung to her, her lips painted deep crimson, and she carried a glass in her hand with the poise of someone trying too hard to look untouchable. But I had seen women like her before. Behind the bravado was a crack, a fear that Robert surely exploited. I waited until she sat alone at a table, then walked over and placed an envelope in front of her. She frowned, tilting her head. "And you are?" she asked with a mocking smile. "I'm Antonio," I said, my voice steady. "Robert's father-in-law, Sarah's father." Her smile faltered, just for a second. She glanced at the envelope, then back at me. What's this supposed to be? Your reality? I answered. Inside the envelope were two things: a photocopy of the fraudulent land transfer bearing her name, and a bank statement I had managed to acquire through contacts, one that showed her debts piling up, her accounts bleeding red. She pulled the papers out, and the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she scanned the signatures, then the bank numbers. He said it was all arranged, she muttered. Arranged? I leaned closer. He used you. He promised you land that was never his to give. He dragged you into fraud, and when this goes to trial, he'll let you sink with him, unless you speak. Her eyes darted around the bar, fear flickering. Before she could answer, the door swung open, and two of Robert's henchmen entered, their eyes locked on me, then on Denise. They started forward, menace in their stride. Without hesitation, I pulled my badge from my pocket and set it on the table, the metal glinting under the dim light. Go ahead, I said coldly. Try me. The two men froze, their bravado wilting. After a tense pause, they backed away and left the bar. Denise stared at me, pale and shaken, her cocktail glass rattling in her hand. She bit her lip, then whispered, I'll testify, but promise me I'll be safe. I nodded once. Do the right thing, and I'll make sure of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tide shift. Robert had just lost his most important piece. The morning of the trial arrived with the weight of a storm. I woke before dawn, unable to rest, my heart hammering in my chest. Sarah sat quietly at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she barely touched. Her face was still marked, faint bruises lingering under her scarf, but her eyes carried a fragile strength. I placed my hand over hers and whispered, We face this together. She nodded, though her lips trembled. Outside, a patrol car waited, arranged by Commander R. Ozils. He nodded as we stepped out, his presence a silent reassurance. The courthouse loomed ahead, its old stone walls gray under the morning sky. Crowds had already gathered, neighbors whispering, their eyes darting between us and the entrance. Some faces held pity, others doubt, and a few looked at us with suspicion, poisoned by Robert's lies. And there he was. Robert stood tall in a sharp suit, his lawyer Valdivia at his side. He smirked as our eyes met, the arrogance radiating from him like a stench. Denise was there too, standing apart, her arms crossed, her gaze heavy. When she saw me, she gave the faintest nod. Inside, the air was thick, the benches packed with townspeople hungry for scandal. Judge Arturo Cervantes entered, his gavel striking, and the trial began. Victor Salazar opened with calm authority, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The photos of Sarah's injuries projected on the screen silenced the murmurs in the room. The medical report followed, Dr. Herrera's signature bold at the bottom. Then came the video from Ricardo's camera, Sarah's desperate knocking echoing through the speakers, her faint cries filling the courtroom like a haunting chorus. Gasps rippled across the benches. I glanced at Sarah. Her head was bowed, her hands trembling in her lap. I reached over, squeezed her shoulder gently. You're not alone, I whispered. Then Valdivia rose, his voice slick as oil. Ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing more than a performance. The young woman sought to extort my client, and her father, an officer of the law, abused his badge to fabricate charges. Robert is innocent, a victim of slander and ambition. The words hit like daggers. I wanted to leap to my feet and shout the truth, but Victor placed a steady hand on my arm, keeping me anchored. Then Denise took the stand. She trembled, but her voice rang clear. Robert promised me a share of land. He showed me documents with forged signatures. He said it was all arranged, but it wasn't. He lied, he cheated, and he hid his wife. The room erupted in murmurs. Robert shot to his feet, red-faced. You traitor, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. Guards rushed to restrain him as the judge slammed his gavel. Order! I rose when it was my turn, my oath heavy on my tongue. I am a police officer, I declared, my voice steady. But today, I am here as a father. That man is no husband. He is no protector. He is an abuser, a liar, and a thief. My words cut through the silence, and for the first time I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the townspeople who had once believed him. The judge's gavel struck again, and the room fell silent. Judge Cervantes adjusted his glasses, his expression grave as he shuffled through the thick stack of evidence laid before him. Every second of silence tightened the noose of anticipation around my chest. Sarah's hand trembled in mine, her eyes wide and glistening. I squeezed her palm, steadying her, though inside I was fighting to steady myself. Finally, Judge Cervantes spoke. His voice was deep, calm, unshakable. This court has reviewed the medical record. Yes, the photographic evidence, the video testimony, and the documents of fraudulent land transfer. We have heard witness accounts, including that of Ms. Denise Salgado. It is the judgment of this court that Robert Mendez is guilty of domestic abuse, fraud, and forgery. A gasp rippled through the benches, followed by a low murmur that swelled like a rising tide. I turned to Robert. His face had gone pale, the smugness stripped away, replaced with something I had never seen in him before: fear. The judge continued. Effective immediately, the fraudulent property transfer is null and void. All assets of the defendant are frozen pending further investigation. A restraining order is issued in favor of Sarah Mendez, protecting her from all contact. Furthermore, the evidence shall be forwarded to the district attorney to pursue criminal charges of usury, fraud, and domestic violence. The gavel struck once more, echoing like a gunshot through the chamber. Court adjourned. The room erupted. Some people whispered in disbelief, others nodded solemnly. A few who had doubted us now looked away, ashamed. I ignored them all. My focus was only on Sarah, her shoulders trembling as she let out a sob of relief. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as if to shield her from the world. Robert, meanwhile, slumped back into his chair, his face ashen. His lawyer, Valdivia, leaned in, whispering frantically, but Robert only shook his head, rage and despair warring in his eyes. 2 guards approached, placing firm hands on his shoulders, and he lashed out with curses that fell flat against the tide of justice closing in on him. When we stepped out of the courthouse, the midday sun blazed overhead, brighter than it had felt in months. The square outside was crowded, people murmuring, some pointing, others whispering. Antonio won. Justice won. But as I held Sarah's hand, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something heavier, deeper, a weight lifting, but leaving behind scars that no verdict could erase. Robert had been defeated in the eyes of the law, but the bruises on my daughter's body, the nights of fear and humiliation, the betrayal that had poisoned our home, those would take longer to heal. Still, for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to breathe. The fight wasn't over, but a battle had been won. The afternoon after the verdict, Robert was led away in handcuffs. The town swarmed the streets outside his pawn shop, watching as police locked the doors and sealed the place. Some cursed him openly, others just stared in shock. A few who had once defended him now whispered excuses, but it didn't matter anymore. Justice had spoken. I didn't go to see him taken away. I didn't need to. The next morning, the newspaper carried his photo. Robert Mendez in a prison jumpsuit, his head bowed, wrists bound. The headline was short, sharp: pawn shop owner arrested for violence and fraud. I studied the picture in silence, then folded the paper and set it aside. I felt no joy, only a strange, heavy relief, as if a stone had been lifted from my chest, though the mark of its weight still remained. Sarah moved back into my house permanently. The first nights were the hardest. She would wake drenched in sweat, crying out in fear that Robert was at the door. I sat by her bed each time, holding her hand, whispering, "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Sometimes she calmed quickly. Other nights, the terror clung to her until dawn. I made sure she saw a psychologist regularly. Little by little, I began to see the shadows lift from her eyes. One afternoon, weeks later, I walked into the kitchen and found her humming softly while stirring a pot of soup. For a moment I just stood there, watching her. The sound of her humming, something I hadn't heard in so long, brought tears to my eyes. She looked up, caught me staring, and smiled. It was faint, but it was real. The neighbors began to change too. Some of those who had doubted us came by to apologize. They admitted they had believed Robert's lies, that fear and gossip had blinded them. I nodded without anger. I didn't have energy left for grudges. Ricardo visited often, always checking on Sarah, bringing small gifts or food. His quiet loyalty reminded me that not everyone had turned their backs. Months passed. Sarah found a new job at an accounting office in the town center. The day she came home with the news, she opened the door with a smile so bright it felt like the sun pouring into my home. She threw her arms around me and whispered, "I got it, Dad." I hugged her fiercely, and for the first time in what felt like forever, our tears were not of pain, but of joy. That night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the breeze cool against my face, I thought of everything we had endured, the bruises, the lies, the threats, the long nights of fear, and then I looked at Sarah's smile through the window. Justice is never easy, I thought. It's slow, it's painful, it leaves scars, but it gives back what matters most: dignity, hope, the chance to begin again. And as her father, I will protect her until my last breath. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you felt my daughter's pain, my struggle, and our fight for justice, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. And tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I'd love to know how far these words have traveled. Your support keeps these stories alive.